More now. Joining us, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, the Republican Congressman Ed Royce of California. Mr. Chairman, thanks very much for joining us. That's very disturbing to see what's going on in Istanbul. 3 American sailors, they leave the USS Ross, they go out there, some shore leave, and all of a sudden they're roughed up by these Turkish thugs.
And they kept their composure, but what's very, very concerning to us is that this particular ultra-nationalist group that obviously pre-planned this attack, it would be good if you heard the head of state in Turkey, Erdogan, speak out. But instead of ratcheting the pressure and the temperature down, his rhetoric has been increasingly anti-American in and of itself. And so for it to be a NATO ally and to have a government here that is so problematic, increasingly, that's been one of the challenges.
And they're still not letting U.S. warplanes take off or land at any of the NATO bases in Turkey, Incirlik, or any of those other bases to launch strikes against ISIS targets, whether in Syria or Iraq, for that matter.
That is correct. And we hope through diplomacy to resolve some of these issues with Turkey, because, frankly, they should have the same interests we have with respect to going against ISIS. But in the meantime, if they don't bring charges against this particular ultra-nationalist Turkish organization, I think we're going to have some questions about it.
So you want to see arrests, you want to see major action. You know the Turkish military, the Turkish police, the intelligence services, their overall security, they're pretty good if you've ever been to Turkey. Could an incident like this happen without them knowing about it? Is this just a bunch of random hooligans, if you will? Because this is looked like a pretty well-organized operation.
I think they can reassure us by making arrests, by bringing these individuals to the bar of justice. That is the appropriate thing for the Turkish officials to do, and yes, I think they have the capability to do it.
I want you to hold on for a moment. We have a lot more to discuss. We've got to take a quick break. Much more with the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee right after this. The chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Republican Congressman Ed Royce of California. You heard Elise Labott, our global affairs correspondent, report right at the top of the hour that there's a new evolving administration strategy, not just to try to degrade and ultimately destroy ISIS, but at the same time go after Bashar al-Assad's regime in Damascus. What do you make of this?
Well, I think that this is one of the requests that the other regional actors have all asked for. Turkey has said, well, we might provide brigades, but first, let's see a plan, because from the Turkish standpoint, they've watched the middle class in Aleppo be hit day after day, 40 airstrikes a day on some days from Assad, just attacks on civilian targets. They're saying, look, if you can marginalize or remove this Assad, we could put Syria back together. That'll make it easier to take on ISIS, and at that point, perhaps we bring troops into the field. You have the same analysis out of the Gulf states. So I think...
Let me interrupt for a second. What does that mean? The U.S., we bring troops back into the field. Well, what does that mean?
Well, this would mean that Turkey would actually commit brigades. You know, their armor is up on the border. You watched that battle. You reported on that battle over Kobani, where you saw the armored divisions of Turkey not engaged in the fight, but simply sitting there watching on the Turkish border, you know, a few football fields away. They could move into these areas and really push back ISIS. But they've asked for a plan, and a plan that deals with the removal of Assad.
So, in other words, what the U.S. would like to see, combat boots on the ground, as they say, but Turkish combat troops going in. The Turks say, why should Turkish ground forces go in when the U.S. refuses to send U.S. ground troops on the ground?
Well, what they're now saying is, show us a plan. Show us something that gets to a situation that will resolve the problem in Syria, such as the removal of Assad. And at that point, we will consider sending those Turkish boots on the ground. Yes. So I think that's part of the dialogue here.
But that would be a huge development if Turkish combat troops, artillery, tanks, armored personnel carriers, warplanes, if they were to move in, they not just go against ISIS, but move in against the Bashar al-Assad regime. You're talking about a huge escalation of this war.
Or a solution to the problem of getting a resolution. Because at this point, you've got several million refugees from Syria, most of them up, you know, in either right on the border or inside Turkey. You have massive losses of life. And so Turkey could, being the largest army in this theater, could put an enormous amount of pressure. And I think this might be an attempt to get more engagement from Turkey on this resolution of the problem with ISIL.
And could you see the day when the U.S. would start using combat ground forces inside either Syria or Iraq, for that matter?
I don't see that happening. What I see is the U.S. potentially training Kurdish forces, U.S. training Sunni anti-ISIL forces, whether they be Iraqi or whether they be, the Free Syrian Army. That I could see, but not the introduction of U.S. combat troops in this theater.
So you don't see that at all. This training program, though, that could take years and years and years to get anywhere, right? In Syria or Iraq, for that matter. The Iraqi military has proven to be basically MIA.
But think about this. You have a different situation in Baghdad today. When General Allen was there last, training for the awakening in Anbar province, at that point you had a functioning relationship. Then you ended up with Maliki, and now Maliki's gone. So I think for that reason they've asked General Allen to return to start the training again, with the presumption that the situation has changed now and we can get some support to those anti-ISIL forces. We want them to do the fight.
Very quickly on Ukraine right now, it looks like that situation along the Russian border with Ukraine is escalating big time. The NATO Supreme Allied Commander, General Philip Breedlove, he even is concerned. He raised the specter of Russia potentially moving equipment, weapons into Ukraine that have nuclear capability.
Breedlove has really been sounding the alarm here, and I think what he sees on the ground is Russian forces as well as the rebels now with equipment moving to try to take the airfield in Donetsk, outside of Donetsk. And what's unusual is the degree of involvement of regular Russian army troops. In the past, they've tried to disguise this, but the other situation.
So you have no doubt that regular Russian military personnel wearing just undeclared uniforms, but wearing military uniforms, they are now deeply entrenched, fighting inside Ukraine?
I have no doubt. And I was in Ukraine. I've talked to a lot of people in theater. There is no doubt at this point in time.
Not just in Crimea, which they've annexed, but elsewhere in eastern Ukraine.
They're over the border, and they're over the border with equipment. And this is no longer just a fight against rebels. This is Russian forces, thinly disguised, that are carrying out the attacks against Ukrainian forces.
In China, President Obama, he spent, 15 or 20 minutes in 3 separate occasions having these informal conversations with the Russian President, yes, Vladimir Putin. We don't know what was said, and they may have an opportunity to have some more informal conversations at the G20 in Brisbane, Australia, which is about to begin. What advice would you give the President? What should he say to Putin?
Well, I think what's surprising here is that with the price of oil rapidly declining because of what the Saudis are doing and pumping, that is 70% of the exports for Russia. It's 52% of their budget for their defense and for their government. And you can see the problem that Russia is going to be in between sanctions, declining prices on oil. Now is the time for Putin to take an exit ramp, off of this situation and wind this thing down, especially with the offer from the Ukrainian government for much more local autonomy, for rebuilding Donetsk, for recognizing the Russian language in that region. They're attempting to make an offer that will be a win-win for everybody and face-saving for Russia. Russia should take it.
Well, at least now, he seems to be doing exactly the opposite.
That's the mystery.
Ukraine is concerned. All right, Congressman, thanks very much for joining us. The chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Ed Royce.